The government should not be allowed and able to avoid its responsibilities and the responsibilities of being open to the public by contracting its job out to private companies.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. A quick message to all educators in New England. NEFAC offers a variety of First Amendment journalism and open government resources for your classrooms. So as you begin this fall semester, have one of our expert speakers present to your students. Use our 30-minute skills classes or FOI video tutorials to enhance your lessons. Since 2006, we've been helping educators like you in providing the tools you need to make a difference in your classroom. So go to nefac.org, click on How We Help, and learn more. I'm here today with Dan Marshall, General Counsel and Litigation Director for the Human Rights Defense Center based in Florida. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Dan and the HRDC recently prevailed in an important public records case in Vermont. NEFAC and other organizations served as amici. Dan, can you start us off here by telling us about the case and the legal questions addressed by the court?
Sure. So HRDC is an organization that files public records requests around the country. We publish several magazines, and usually our public records requests are aimed at getting information from government entities so that we can write up news stories in our magazines. And so for this public records request, we sent a request to WellPath, which is formerly CCS, which is a private company that provided healthcare services to the Vermont Department of Corrections. Basically, they provided all the healthcare to prisoners in Vermont. And we sent the request for any verdicts and settlements, basically information about times that WellPath had been sued over its provision of medical services in Vermont. And as I said, the goal here was to get information that we could then use and publish in the magazines.
So you made these requests. Did you get all of the information that you asked for? What happened as a result of the request?
Yeah, no, we got zero of the information that we asked for. WellPath took the position that they are not subject to Vermont's public records laws and stonewalled, basically. They didn't give us anything. So we had to file the lawsuit. We had some previous cases in Vermont with other private entities who had both entities that ran prisons and then provided healthcare in prisons. And we actually had a pretty good case from previously against a different defendant where they had CCS was a different prisoner company that ran prisons for Vermont prisoners. And we had a case against them where the court found that they were subject to the public records law. WellPath was trying to say that, no, we just do medical services. We don't run the whole prison. Therefore, that case doesn't apply to us. Tried to distinguish it in that way. But we felt we were pretty solid ground, based on the pero rulings in some other cases.
So tell us a little bit more about that distinction, because as we all know, we have a public records law in Vermont that allows citizens to get information about government. But here we're talking about a private company, which one would think wouldn't fall under the public records law. It's not a public company. It's not run by the government. It's a private entity. So why should you get these records related to this private company under the public records law?
Yeah, well, the whole thing here is that the government should not be allowed and able to avoid its responsibilities and the responsibilities of being open to the public by contracting its job out to private companies. So, clearly, if the Vermont Department of Corrections was providing health services, they'd be subject to the public records law. Here, it's the same thing. There's still essentially an agent of the Department of Corrections. So the whole point, and Vermont actually has a very good language in its public records law about the importance of the openness of government and the ability of Vermont citizens to be able to figure out are my elected officials acting, doing a good job or not, basically. And by allowing a public agency like the Department of Corrections to avoid oversight, essentially, by contracting its mandatory functions, it is required to provide health services to the prisoners in its custody. By allowing them to contract with a private entity and avoid their openness requirements, by doing so, just will be counter to the legislature's intent by enacting the law.
So tell us a bit about the hearing itself. This case went all the way up to the highest court in Vermont. What did the arguments look like? You mentioned the ones that you were making, but on behalf of WellPath, were they making any kind of novel arguments as to why they, as a private entity, shouldn't be subject to the public records law?
Well, so there were two main issues in the Supreme Court, and they were kind of based on they were framed by what happened in the trial court. And so based on the successful cases that we had previously in Vermont, we were arguing that the WellPath was the functional equivalent to legalese that the courts have adopted in these public records cases to determine whether a private entity should be subject to the public records laws. And there's a 4-factor test that you go through to determine whether a private company is the functional equivalent of a government entity. And so based on the prior cases that I mentioned earlier, we were arguing based on the functional equivalence test that WellPath was the functional equivalent of a government agency. WellPath, they had two arguments, basically. Number one, that the functional equivalency test was wrong, that the Vermont's, their reading of the statute was that it shouldn't apply to private entities, period. But then they also were saying that even if the court was going to apply the functional equivalency test, WellPath didn't meet the test. And so in the trial court, we won on the first issue. The court agreed that private entities generally could be subject to the public records law. And it actually helped that the trial court judge who was making these rulings was actually the same one as from one of the previous cases. But the court then found that WellPath was not the trial court found that WellPath was not the functional equivalent of the DOC, and therefore ruled against us. So then we filed the appeal to the Vermont Supreme Court, which it's funny, they kind of sidestepped the functional equivalency test. They didn't say that it applied or that it didn't apply, but they just found that under the wording of the statute, one of the way the statute is written is that an instrumentality of a public agency is subject to the public records law, and they found that WellPath was an instrumentality of the Department of Corrections, because they were handling a mandatory function for the Department of Corrections, and reversed the trial court and ruled in our favor.
Excellent. Well, congrats with that ruling. But what now? Are you now expecting a big envelope with all of the records produced, or what is the next step following this ruling? Yeah,
that would be great. Unfortunately, the way WellPath has been litigating this case, I'm not expecting that yet. So now we're back to the trial court. They have some other arguments that they're probably going to raise. I'm guessing that there are some exemptions that they're going to try to apply to their records. No, we don't have the records yet. We're back to the trial court for some more litigating, probably. And I'm guessing, this is a little speculation on my part, but I think what's going on here is they probably have some settlements that have confidentiality agreements in them that they do not want to disperse. So, we'll see when they get there. The law is pretty clear, though, from a bunch of states that, that's not a reason not to turn documents over. So,
well, good luck with the continued litigation. And before we wrap up here, Dan, if you could, for those that don't have a legal background, aren't journalists, and maybe haven't filed any public record requests on their own, though I hope if you're listening, you all do. Could you explain for us, the consequence of the Vermont Supreme Court's ruling? Why is this important for your average citizen and their right to know?
Yeah, it's extremely important because this is, among other things, records like this is how citizens can determine whether their government is functioning properly or not. So, for example, if we get a bunch of records showing that WellPath was providing substandard medical care, which we've seen in many, many, many states where they operate, that informs our elected officials whether to continue contracts with WellPath and whether to hire them again. It informs the public whether they should vote for officials who are hiring WellPath to provide medical services in the DOC. So it's really important that people are able to see these records so that they can, decide whether the government is functioning properly.
Dan, thank you for fighting this battle, and congrats again on the win. And really appreciate you walking us through the case and helping us understand these issues. Many thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.